Hi, and welcome to Voices from the Left. I'm Craig. Thanks for listening. Our quote for today: "It is a time for martyrs now, and if I am to be one, it will be for the cause of brotherhood. That's the only thing that can save this country." Malcolm X. You can see the citation for that information in the show notes. Today I'll be speaking with Anthony DePice. He's a fantastic content creator, primarily on Instagram, including doing a lot of work for the Cocktails and Capitalism podcast. We'll be discussing, among other things, his Instagram work for Cocktails and Capitalism and Stop Cop City, interunion solidarity, and America's two-party political system. Let's get started. Hi, Anthony. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Craig. Happy to be here. Thank you.
You bet. So, will you please share some info about yourself and how you became radicalized?
Sure. So I'm originally from Philadelphia. I grew up in, I guess, what you might call like a libertarian, Christo-fascist kind of thing. And I, always had a sense of right and wrong. I've always been very passionate about helping people and whatnot. And then through sort of the Bernie campaign, the first one, I began to see that like you can do good without the church. You can do good without, sort of banking on spiritual revolution. There's material conditions and there's, ways in which our society is structured that are inherently, perpetuating the violence that people experience. And so I linked up my sort of emotional and just knowledge as a person, my appetite to listen to people's stories or read or whatever, relate to my world or whatever in the world, and I was able to then bridge that into like the material kind of work that needs to be done in order to effect real transformation here. So the Bernie thing helped with that. Going to UCLA helped with that. Encountering revolutionary professors and working folks from all kinds of backgrounds from all over the world, just sort of my, I guess, good temper, made it such that I could always relate and be open to learning and growing, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I guess just one thing I thought of off the top of my head was, you mentioned UCLA. There's, that's going back to the 60s, right? That's been a hotbed of like counterculture, I guess, maybe revolutionary type things, right? So it kind of fits that happened even now, within the last 5 years, I suppose, or 10 years.
Yeah. And I do want to say too that like, in particular, this one professor, Robin D.G. Kelly, who's written, about communism and workers' struggles, but who also was an apartheid activist on that campus in the 80s. Was a big influence and continues to be through his work and whatnot. And even more recently, like Shamel Bell is a Black Lives Matter activist and thinker who was in the same sort of department that I was in. And I was definitely blessed by that trajectory for sure.
Let's switch gears now to your Instagram content creation. So I've been aware of Anthony for several months, which isn't very long considering, but it's because of his work for my favorite podcast, Cocktails and Capitalism, which is an anti-capitalist podcast. Which, I'm plugging it because it's awesome.
Shout out to Erica.
So yeah, totally. So I was sitting around the campfire in my backyard one Friday, as I like to do in the summer, and it dawned on me that Anthony had a story to tell simply because of how prolific he's been on Instagram. And this is no joke. Like, I'm not trying to be corny. Like, that's, I was sitting there and I was like, you know what? I think I certainly feel like we have enough common ground to have a conversation, if not, some comradeship. Right. So anyway, I drunk DM'd him on Instagram and I said, hey man, would you like to be a guest? And he replied with an enthusiastic yes. And the next 24 hours, he was including me on what I feel like was every post or reel or story. I don't know if it was every one, but it was a lot. As a collaborator, I guess it's called, right? My follower count went up by like 50 that 24 hours. It was amazing. And I didn't do anything other than click yes on review, right? And I was like, holy shit, this is great. Um, so it's been great in part one because I suck so badly at Instagram. So thank you for that, Anthony, for helping me with that. But two, because we both like the Cocktails and Capitalism podcast, so or presumably, I know I do. But so I guess I'm interested in what inspired you to create content for Dr. Erica.
Okay, yes. Yeah, thank you for that correction. Dr. Erica's right. So I guess what inspired me was an invitation from Dr. Erica.
Mm,
She reached out to me and we had a conversation, and similarly to how you framed it, it seemed like there was enough common ground between us. I did have to explain a little bit about it's funny, I'll borrow from my favorite podcast, or one of them, WTF with Mark Maron.
okay.
But like I was like, oh, I have to square my religion a little bit with, my revolutionary politics. I knew that was going to be a little bit of a concern. And so once that was sort of, established, that I was really big on, like, inclusive and a sort of radical faith that's very alien to the dominant, Christian faith that we know, then we were off to the races. And yeah, we've been cooking up content together and shining light on, important struggles. And in a similar way to what you were saying about me, I'm very grateful to Dr. Erica for, helping me get in front of more folks and just help amplify, voices that are not traditionally associated with our, revolutionary space, in terms of like Indigenous, especially Black, Latinx, AAPI folks that, we just need to take the lead from in our work, and, so that we're not in danger of creating any kind of like an echo chamber or playing into the tropes of, like the sort of spoiled white, straight male
Yeah.
radical,
Totally.
and which I'm super, implicating myself in, especially coming out of the gates talking about UCLA and stuff. But yeah, I guess that was a little bit of how it came to be, and I'm very grateful. Also, I'll say, because I know that there were folks who like knew about the opening on her team and applied and stuff, and so she was just struck, I guess, similarly to you again, by my sincerity and prolific quality of content, and I guess also how like connected I was with folks in different struggles that are like on the ground, because that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
what I'm obsessed with, is like, being as sort of connected with them as I can, and especially now where I can do more things in person, I am blessed again by that sort of solidarity that I've been developing, and I'm glad that that's something that people associate me with or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's great. And like I've been aware of you for a few months because I started getting heavily on Instagram, which I hadn't been on Instagram more than logging in and looking at
Hmm.
one picture, and then two
Yeah.
years later logging back in and looking at another picture from someone until this spring, really.
Hmm.
And so I was like, at the hell with Twitter, I want to go play around on Instagram, figure out how that works, right? And
Hmm.
I'm okay at figuring stuff out, but like, I haven't put the energy in like you have to actually hone it and like, you know, make it work. Anytime you're Googling
Thank
stuff
you.
to see how a piece of software works, you probably shouldn't be even trying to do it if you can't
No, no,
figure it
no.
out innately.
Yeah, no, no,
But
no. It's too much time that I put on it. That's all.
yeah. So how long have you been doing the content creation for Cocktails and Capitalism?
I mean, it sounds like however long, you've been aware of me, like the 6 months or whatever.
Okay, so it's only been about that long. Okay.
Yeah.
All
We
right.
finally got to meet, by the way, my wife and I and Dr. Erica, a couple weeks ago, which was awesome. Again, a plug for in-person solidarity. Not that
Yeah.
online's not great, but as much as you can get out together, it's awesome.
Yeah. In person's better for sure.
Yeah,
So that's awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Do you anything else you wanna say specifically about I guess your work for Cocktails and Capitalism?
Um, yeah, I guess I would like to say, I know we're probably going to touch on it later, but like that I really believe in Dr. Erica's vision in terms of leftist unity. And I think that, like I was talking about before, that so much of that has to do with, traditional demographics or whatever, not necessarily having the mic as much, ironically, but but I just feel that she really embodies that well. Really puts an emphasis on centering folks that are at risk and choosing greater risk, for the benefit of working folks everywhere, for the benefit of our, planet. I think that I know I've talked to you about this, but I think it bears mentioning that part of what I like about being in this role, kind of like what I liked about being at UCLA, is that as a sort of outsider or a newer revolutionary or whatever, I can see, I don't want to say pain points, but I can see areas where folks are maybe a little precious about, theory or rhetoric or, whatever. And it's kind of nice to do what I enjoy doing, which is provoking on some level and in a positive way, trying to help folks remember that working people don't necessarily care about all the ins and outs of our, various sects and, fractions. And what they care about is their lives improving. And so, I, again, am grateful for Dr. Erica, in that she's helping me and helping the movement, really build as many bridges as we can between all the different groups, because, like our comrade Earth Liberation Studio recently wrote about in a post, there's no danger of any one faction on the left gaining any type of, superpower that is then going to crush all the other ones. We are overwhelmingly in a far right, sort of a paradigm. I know we're going to talk about politics and stuff too, but we don't even have a real left. And so, I think that it's awesome that she's doing everything she can to bring us all together and just lead by example in that respect. So, thank you for hearing me out.
You bet. And to that point about unity, that's part of where the idea for my show came from. I got fired back in January of this year. I was a manager. I'm not going to get into it too much, and I am working again. And I was well off. So, this is no woe is me story. Believe me. I'm doing fine. But I had a couple months off, and I would have liked more off, to be honest, because I hadn't had more than 10 working days off for 15 years at that point. Wow. So it was just God damn, this sucks. But anyway, so that 2 months off was great before I started working again. But in that time, I created a new Twitter account at the time before it all went to total hell like it is now. I created the Instagram account that you and I know, and I said, I started listening. I just randomly ran into all these podcasts. I had listened to a couple since 2020, and I'm pretty new to the podcast just experience in general, only for a couple of years. I know they've been around forever, 20 years at this point, probably, or longer. But it, the original idea I had to make the show was not what it is now. But I just threw and I've been thinking about it for months. And finally one morning I just woke up and I was just after hearing, I forget even what it was, but I was this needs to be about unity on the left. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter what your cause is. We all at some point have common ground where we can move together. So I appreciate that you said that, because that's true. That's what we need. It doesn't matter whether you're for trans rights or climate change or whatever the cause is, that making people's lives better. That's the point, right? So it's everyone can move forward together. And a lot of cases anyway, it's all the same part of the system that needs to change to help everyone, right? Yeah. So that's this is going to be great. So all right, next so I've got a little bit here. This is going to be a little bit of a long read, so I apologize. But so what is Cop City? From the stopcop.city website, the city of Atlanta has leased 381 acres of Weelaunee Forest, stolen Muskogee land, to the Atlanta Police Foundation for a police military facility funded by corporations and taxpayer dollars. The Atlanta Police Foundation is trying to build the largest police training facility in the U.S. in the Weelaunee Forest, which is a watershed surrounded primarily by Black residents who overwhelmingly oppose the project. The plans include military-grade training facilities, a mock city to practice urban warfare, dozens of shooting ranges, and a Black Hawk helicopter pad. Can't imagine why a police force would need that, but okay. Some of the corporations funding Cop City include Home Depot, Bank of America, Chick-fil-A, and Wells Fargo. As if we needed another reason to dislike Chick-fil-A or Wells Fargo. They're just how Wells Fargo is even still in business is fucking beyond me. For more info about corporate funding, you can head to stopcopcitysolidarity.org. They've got it all laid out for you. Who's doing what and where, including all over the country, not just Atlanta. I mean, because Home Depot's, their headquarters is in the Atlanta area, I think, somewhere.
Yep.
On January 18th, 2023, police shot and killed forest defender Tortuguita in a raid of the Stop Cop City encampment. The autopsy released by the DeKalb County Medical Examiner ruled the death a homicide, having found 57 gunshot wounds on their body and no evidence of gunshot residue on their hands. Providing further evidence of what any reasonable person already knows: the world does not need another militarized police training facility. And so I say all that because we really need to set the tone and lay out the facts for people, right? And I know that you do Instagram content for Stop Cop City. I've seen a lot of it, and it's been great. So what inspired you to start making content for them?
I was compelled by the story. I think it was before Tortuguita's murder, and I just immediately saw the intersectional, blend. I think Dr. Erica, it was probably Reverend Kayana, honestly, but on her podcast, was talking about an ecosystem of tactics. It could have been Kamau Franklin. Anyway, one of the organizers on the ground was talking about this term, and now it's become like synonymous with the movement, which is like, and that's just in terms of tactics, but it's also like the way it blends together, climate justice and racial justice and like even just obviously in the way that you laid it out, folks can start to see those connections. And I guess I was just really compelled by the way that they were doing that. And I could see what we were just talking about. I could see how they were strategically leveraging that cross-section of movements to build, this bigger solidarity. And that's what's happened. Like you said, there's folks all over the US, all around the world that have been doing protests and things in solidarity. And most recently, the relevance was underscored in terms of Baltimore proposing a $330 million Cop City, but there's versions of it, in Michigan, and just all over. And obviously with, and I know we've talked about this too, but I want to point to that because I think it's important, like you said, that we connect with each other more and whatnot. So when I say that we've talked about it, I'm not trying to exclude anybody. I'm just saying I encourage you to have these, cross dialogues with your comrades. Just the fact that these, struggles are connected and that the plan for the ruling class, the billionaires, in terms of climate change, in terms of an end game for everything, is to militarize the police. And that's why, you see that thing that I know you understand, but about the Black Hawk, pad and whatnot, because you see what's already being done in Palestine, what's being done, by U.S. forces all around the world and has always. But my point here just being that what's most compelling to me about this whole thing is that it really lays bare the, hypocrisy of our sort of system, and the fact that, like, the only strength, the only resistance that there is the kind of multi-layered, multiracial, everything, multi-generational struggle that we're talking about, the real solidarity that just brings all of us together, because otherwise, we are at the mercy of these just, heinously violent and cruel, forces in terms of the police, and that, their plan is only to give more, and somebody, like Biden has only given millions and millions more to it, and so it's like, we just have to lay it bare, and that's what the folks in Cop City, in that movement, the Stop Cop City movement rather, have done a great job with, and that's what drew me into it, was just the way in which they laid that bare, and Tortuguita, in their just contributions, and not just their death, because the media did a good job at covering their death, the mainstream media, like the dominant, even press, but as like this gory, thing. And like the reality is that like they dreamt, of a better world. And if you listen to folks that knew them, like that's what's most compelling to me, honestly, fundamentally about being involved in this are the relationships, are connections like this, and like ones with even Dr. Erica that never would have happened if I hadn't, been sort of awoken in this way by the movement in terms of just like, being so much more prolific and engaged and yeah, connected to folks. I had those inklings, I had that nature, but yeah, this definitely activated me in a lot of ways. So in a positive way.
Yeah, for sure. The police exist to protect the wealth and property of the wealthy, right? And you can't see that shining through any more than you can with this particular type of facility. Why the hell is Home Depot give a shit if this facility is built? Why would they give a fuck? The only reason is protect their property, right?
Yep.
Which means protecting their profits.
Yep.
That's the only reason. So you can even the roots and the rotted roots of capitalism are all over this, right?
Yep.
So it's like, it's sickening. It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. Is there anything else you'd like to add about Stop Cop City? I know we could talk for hours and hours and hours about it.
I don't want to end on that note. I want to say that, like, I've spoken, I've been blessed, and I again, any Christian vernacular that I'm using, let's remember I'm using in the sense of a more radical, let's say Dorothy Day or something aspect. But anyway, yeah, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have connected directly with Belkis Taran, who is Tortuguita's mother, and that was on Instagram too, by the way. And like, I just want to say that like there's just so much love, there's so much welcome, there's so much hope, and like, yeah, solidarity in the most comprehensive and overwhelming, manner that you can conceive of that word. In this movement, there's just so much light, and that's what I want to kind of like, leave folks with, because yes, it's extremely dark and evil, but bound up in it is like the seeds of that better world, because you see that, like, or in the struggle at least, you see that, like, we're not necessarily, like Tortuguita said, going to realize it in this generation or the next generation. We don't know when it will fully come and what it will look like, but there are folks, there are abolitionists who, are, that's it. That's what I was trying to think of. Mariam Kaba. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I'm sorry. But who like do that work of abolition now. Like they provide that community healing. They provide that accountability that's not rooted in violence and in, incarceration and whatnot. And so there are ways, including the Stop Cop City movement, that we can dream of and, sort of build a better world, because part of this too has just really awoken me to like the whole propaganda kind of thing, and like the apocalypse media that we're just constantly fed in terms of like, and I'm like, I'm passionate about film, I'm passionate about art and stuff. And it's like, I didn't think about how it's like, we're conditioned to like, even on our off day, even when we're kicking back and having a beer and just like chilling, we're supposed to conceive of like a best case scenario as like a zombie land or something. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, it's just so like, broken. And so anyway, so what I would definitely want to leave the Stop Cop City thing with is that like, there's so much hope, there's so much sort of ability to, look past what we're presented with as options and be like, no, fuck that. We deserve more. The planet, requires it, and we're gonna get there.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, for sure. We have an obligation to protect the planet and its life forms. We just do, and a lot of people don't feel that way, and that's why we have the problems we do. But okay. So you touched on a little bit earlier, but I think we'll talk about something I think that you wanted to talk about specifically was, I think originally the discussion was going to center around duopoly, the idea of two parties, two parts, two pieces running something, right?
Sure.
I had asked you after you had said that to me, I said, are you talking about America's useless two-party political system? And you were like, yeah, I am. I was like, okay, so For this, I went and I did a little digging. Didn't have to dig very hard. Because, and you brought it up earlier, Bernie Sanders' campaign from 2016. So basically this discussion is going to be, about America's two-party political system and its effect on the third parties that want to get involved. Okay, so this discussion includes two parts: the Democratic Party's railroading of Bernie Sanders in 2016 presidential campaign and public funding of elections. So first we'll be discussing an article written by Brianna Acuesta, I think that's how you pronounce that, for trueactivist.com. The article is specifically about the 2016 Democratic primary. So I'll lay out some facts here, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion. So Bernie Sanders won the New Hampshire primary, but still had the same number of delegates as Hillary Clinton due to the way delegates work. So New Hampshire had 24 delegates up for grabs. Sanders was awarded 15 and Clinton 9. Problem is Clinton already had another 6 committed to her before the primary even happened in the form of superdelegates. Superdelegates are not elected by the popular vote, but they get to vote how they want, meaning they can give their vote to whichever candidate they want to. Bill Clinton was one of those superdelegates. Hillary also had the support of the Democratic National Committee, which is supposed to remain impartial by their own rules. They're supposed to remain impartial. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was the chair of the DNC at the time and outwardly supported the Clinton campaign in a couple of ways. She supported the DNC's decision to only have 6 debates that all ended by March 2016. The majority of which took place before the Iowa caucuses in February of 16. My understanding is that people thought there should be a lot more of them, a lot more debates, and they should be spread out more throughout the year and closer to election day, because people aren't necessarily paying attention that early, right? Yeah. They get election fatigue, campaign ad fatigue, and it starts so early now. In addition to that, the finance chair of the DNC helped fundraise for Clinton, which is also in violation of the DNC's rules to remain impartial. The DNC rules state that the chairperson shall be responsible for ensuring that the national officers and staff of the DNC maintain impartiality and even-handedness during the Democratic Party presidential nominating process. Oh, by the way, Schultz also served as the co-chair of Clinton's campaign in 2008. So there's some facts. A little bit of conjecture on my part, but I don't think I'm too far off the mark on what my opinion there. Right. But just in general, to me, those alone, this describes obvious corruption, right? Yeah. One, because Bill Clinton was a superdelegate. Right. That's right. But a little less obvious maybe in the form of superdelegates in general, because superdelegates are susceptible to bribing, just like anyone else, right? Yeah. Some will call it lobbying. That's not what it is. I mean, that's technically what it is, but it's really bribing. But that's a synonym for bribery. Yeah, they're the same word. They're the same thing, right? They're functionally the same at any rate. But, sadly, the Supreme Court also says that this type of behavior is not corruption. And just the way I see it from the numerous cases from SCOTUS over the years that I'm aware of, it seems to me that the only way for SCOTUS to view something as corruption is if there's a video of someone handing another person a bag of cash with "I'm giving you this to vote in favor of my interest" written on the side. And people are going to think I'm being hyperbolic or just being a dick. Right. And it's like, no, if you look at what they say, you look at the opinions that they've come out with. Yeah. Look at the Ted Cruz lawsuit that he intentionally violated campaign finance law so he would get in trouble, so he could file a lawsuit to get that rule that he didn't like overturned. And it worked because the Supreme Court's captured. The superdelegates are a way, in my opinion, a way for the mainstream Democrats to retain control of the party, right? Yeah. Right. the same mainstream Democrats that are in the pocket of corporate interests and not acting
Yep.
in good faith for the American people, right? And the
Yes.
fact that Schultz was co-chair of Clinton's 2008 campaign, that's icing on the corruption cake, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So, I look at all of that, and it's just like he never had a fair shake, right?
Right.
So it's like they obviously didn't want him to win it,
Right.
but and he didn't for
Right.
some of these reasons and some others.
Yeah.
But what's your take on it?
Um, I don't know. I mean, it was just really discouraging, I guess. Um, especially the second time. But yeah, I guess it just really, like in the same way that he had originally awakened me up in a lot of ways to what could be done or how we could try to participate. It's kind of like it was a death knell too, especially when the second, like when we heard the news about Biden getting, like all those states, it's a joke. Like this whole sort of thing is a farce, like you're pointing out, obviously in a very rigorous way, and I appreciate that. But it's just like, it has no sort of validity, and not to make everything about Cop City, but like, it's the Democrat run city right now, Atlanta. City council is majority Democrat, and majority, not necessarily majority, but there are a lot of folks of color on the leadership, including Andre Dickens, who's the mayor. And so this whole idea that like the Democrats have, the progressives and whatnot have brought in terms of like, we're just going to get younger, more inclusive folks in charge, and we're going to steer the ship, in the right direction is just false. And honestly, the biggest thing that again Eric has helped me work through is like, that the whole sort of idea of America, and and not just Erica, not just like, oh, I never heard of it, but it's just a very confirming sort of, it was a very confirming moment for like, oh, right, this whole thing is bankrupt. This whole idea has been antithetical to working people forever. And yeah, like I remember the biggest wake up, I think, in that respect, or the first one, was when I was at Temple University in Philly, and I had like, I guess, an anarchist professor or whatever. And she was just sort of talking about how like folks didn't want the revolution, the country of the United States to be founded. Like,
Right. Yeah.
folks here, working people, were not in favor of it, and so anyway, there's just so many examples of how bankrupt it is. I'm not gonna like try to waste more of your time. I'm sorry, I always go on tangents, but
No
but
worries.
like but it's just incredibly frustrating, I guess, is where I go with it. Because it's kind of like the perfect, foil, where we see this happen with movements all the time with the Democrats, where it's like they bring you in or they co-opt a movement that has a lot of momentum and that has lots of folks in it, and then they use that momentum and energy and whatnot to basically just, keep things exactly the way that they are, keep the, wealthy people in charge still, and nothing fundamentally changes like Biden promised it wouldn't, and like, yeah, I guess that was just the big thing with Bernie, was because he was just such a great example. And I still say it in terms of what we're talking about unity, because it's not like, oh, he's perfect and whatever, but as a man, as an organizer and whatnot, like the dude has put in the work and has shown that there is a way to do good for folks, and not like in that, co-opted harm reduction sort of rhetoric, about, oh, blue no matter who, and we have to vote Democrat, but just in the sense that like, we can do good for people. There are ways, there are socialists, there are good, folks in politics, and they exist, and they're doing the best that they can. And it doesn't mean that we are at all giving electoral politics any sort of vaulted position or saying that voting is going to change anything really. But at the same time, we have to build real, again, in-person solidarity with people that we can trust, that are trying to combat the forces of just outright, violence, like the Cop City sort of things, and whether that's in the Democrats or the Republican, sort of party. So there's a lot to look at there, but yeah, I would say that that the biggest thing with Bernie was the longevity for me. Just seeing that picture of him getting carried away, protesting the segregated, schools in Chicago was just like, holy shit, like this dude has just been at it for decades. And I liked that example. And I liked what he embodies in terms of what we're talking about unity, because that he's not sucking up all the air in a room and like, trying to just sort of like, talk. And it's like, it sucks that right now he's really failed us and has embraced the sort of, rotten roots, because I love that imagery that that you invoked here. But it's like, I will still hold on to the example of somebody who, exists in this capitalist framework, but tries to, change it and hack away at that root system.
Sure. Yeah, it's the kind of thing, and I've heard lots of discussions about it recently. I don't even remember where, all over the map. But like, there is still a reason to vote, right? There still is, and we'll get into a little bit why that's the case here in a second. But like, there's some people that have just written off working within the system altogether, and they said we can only work outside the system. And my contention is that we need to do both still.
Yep.
You need to do the things like Climate Defiance is doing, right?
Exactly.
They're working inside the system, right?
Right.
They're using their, all of our constitutional rights to protest.
Right.
And they're doing it in a way to create a ton of exposure. Right. Is it going to change anything? I don't know. It will affect some people, right?
Right.
Is it going to affect the Biden administration? No, you can just see it in the way they look at it, right? The way Kamala looked at it a couple of weeks ago, right? Like laughing at him, but like they still need to do it. But work outside the system also needs to happen, right? And that's about organizing, help and figuring out how you can subvert, right? How you can subvert it. And I'm not necessarily talking about violence, but like, because there are ways without violence that you can do this, but you still have to do both things, right? You need people on the inside and the outside, I think, anyway. There's going to be a difference of opinion, especially amongst leftists, about how you do that.
But oftentimes the folks that are holding that line of that, like, there's nothing positive that ever happens, are not the folks in your local DSA or PSL or whatever chapter that are out there organizing with, renters, that are out there organizing with, workers, that are really building relationships. Because again, with folks like Bernie and folks like in Stop Cop City and whatnot, these are real people, that are just sort of like doing what they can with what they have, and they are not holding water for this system. They are not, acting like, unlike Bernie, that any kind of dominant party or system is going to save us, but they are making, change in whatever way I know you, and I want to speak to your, sort of credibility in terms of being an organizer for years. And I know that, like, the folks that have the most to say about this kind of stuff in a negative way, and that just like their blood boils about it, I am very challenged to find anything positive to say, because I know that they are not actually sincere, because then they would be putting more on the line. They would be doing more, like, to change things. So I don't know. I would just welcome that battle.
Well, I think, and the idea is necessarily like not even to like have the battle, it's to find common ground somewhere amongst everybody. Yeah, I know what you're saying though. Totally. So, and in the vein of Sanders, like some will say like, well, he should have run as a third party and not a Democrat.
Right.
There is validity to that.
Right.
And which I'll get into in a minute. But I think his best chance of becoming president, at least in 2016, was to run on the Democratic ticket.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a project like Climate Defiance, like Climate Defiance, working within and without, it was the perfect way for somebody like me, who never would have heard of him or given a shit, quite frankly, if he was a third party back then, because I just wasn't plugged in enough.
Right.
It's like, it was the perfect subversion of the status quo to hear somebody talking about Medicare for all and like just these like quote unquote common sense things, but that, will never be given any kind of, light, never given any media attention. And so, I don't know. There's a lot there.
There is a lot there for sure, and it's sad because he was, pretty much intentionally kept out by the mainstream Democrats, right? Because, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much more.
Sure.
I think it's obvious to anybody that's going to be listening to this that they already know it. So,
Yep.
But
I hear you.
yeah. So, all right, let's discuss running as a third party candidate in particular then. So for this, we'll be using the rules for public funding of presidential elections from the Federal Election Commission's website. This was very easy to find. I will have all these links to all these things I've been mentioning in the show notes for anybody that wants to go look to, say, is he full of shit what he said? I'm not, at least not all the time. So I want to give a couple definitions here just to clarify before we talk about what the rules actually say, because I wasn't aware of for sure one of them. So within the Federal Elections Commission, there are major party, minor party, and new party affiliations. So a major party is a party whose candidate received 25% or more of the popular vote in the preceding election. So that's all, that's almost always going to be Democrats or Republicans, right? Almost every single time, at least for president. A minor party is a party whose candidate received between 5% and 25% of the total number of popular votes received by all candidates for such office. And a new party is a party which is neither major nor minor. I didn't look into it any further, but I'm guessing it would be people who are less than 5% of the popular vote, would be my guess. But I didn't dig into it any farther than that. So there's a presidential funding program that allows eligible major and minor party candidates to receive federal tax dollars to pay for qualified expenses of their political campaigns in both primary and general elections. And candidates will receive the funding if they meet a set of criteria. So public funding for major candidates in the general election includes a grant in the form of $20 million plus a cost of living adjustment. To qualify, they must agree to limit spending to the amount of the grant and may not accept private contributions for the campaign. This will be of no surprise when I say these next few sentences. 2008 was the last year a major party chose to accept a general election grant. I contend that this is because of the Citizens United Supreme Court case decision from 2010, which I'll bring up a little bit more in a minute. Just as a point of fact, in 2020, the general election grant for a major party would have been $103.7 million, which might seem like a lot of money on the surface, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's not that much money anymore, right?
Yeah.
So public funding for minor party candidates in the general election is based on the ratio of the party's popular vote in the preceding presidential election to the average popular vote of the two major party candidates in that election. So the way I read that is, if a minor party received one vote for every 5 votes the major parties received in the preceding election, the minor party would receive 20% of the total funds available to a major party for that upcoming election. That's how I look at that.
Yeah.
A new party candidate receives partial public funding after the election if they receive 5% or more of the vote. The entitlement is based on the ratio of the new party candidate's popular vote in the current election to the average popular vote of the two major parties in that same election. The FEC does audit the campaigns who receive funds to ensure compliance, but, whatever. Like I said, no major parties asked for any money since 2008.
Yeah.
And now I'll get into a little bit why I think that's the case. So the law is it appears anyway, to be heavily stacked in the favor of Democrats and Republicans, right? The disparity was further compounded by the U.S. Supreme Court in the Citizens United decision from 2010, where they ruled that corporate political donations are speech protected by the First Amendment. Think about that a minute. To me, that's utter horseshit for a couple of reasons. One of them being dark money, right? Dark money is election-related spending where the source is secret. Citizens United contributed to a major jump in this type of spending which often comes from nonprofits that are not required to disclose their donors, which, by the way, was also a case ruled on by the Supreme Court within the last, like, I don't know, 25 or 30 years or something.
Yeah.
Dark money topped $1 billion in 2020. Billion with a B. So when we look at that and just like, I don't, yes, you want the third party candidates to run so that they can get that money, right?
Right.
However, even if someone runs as a third party and gets $103 million,
yeah,
you can't compete with $1 billion, right? They how are you going to compete with that? It's completely absurd.
Yeah.
What has been allowed to happen. I don't get it. So, I guess I don't really have a whole lot more to say about it that without, going down a rabbit hole where I'll be depressed for 6 months. But I do want to know, what you think about it. So.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, it's incredibly depressing, like you're saying, and we've been saying, and I kind of think that, yeah, in the same way that I was kind of intrigued with how you described like climate defiance again as like working within the system, because I see it as so like anti-system, in terms of like it being this like very unwelcome intrusion and a sort of thing that like Democrats have made it clear, even progressives, that they don't welcome. Speaking of SCOTUS and how like, when there were people protesting about the abortion decision at, the SCOTUS people's homes, they were like, well, that's just totally inappropriate. And they like quickly passed like legislation like that night or whatever to, condemn that and vilify. So it's like, I think that where I go with this is again the idea of like, the Bernie kind of thing where it's like you co-opt as much of it as you can, because the more I think about all that and this whole like, mammoth of like what you're saying in terms of how much money goes into these campaigns, hundreds of millions of dollars, like for one campaign, it's like a very frustrating sort of gambit, obviously. And best case scenario, then there's checks and balances or whatever. Like, they're going to have their hands tied. Every kind of weapon that exists that can be, marshaled against them will be. And so it's just sort of like, I have very little, optimism about it. I do feel like, again, whether they're Green Party or they're local, folks like socialists and whatnot, I think that there are people that are doing good. I think that, that whole like, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain thing is totally apt, because we watch it happen so quickly with like AOC and the squad and all that, where it was just like, oh, now they're voting for the Iron Dome. Oh, now they're, increasing police budgets. Now they're, saying that detention centers are not concentration camps and are actually just fine and whatever. So it's just like, I have very little, faith, but at the same time, it's a despair. It isn't a rage. And I'm not like saying that anybody who engages in anything involving electoral politics is an idiot or a fool or whatever. I think that like there are ways, again, I know that we agree on this, but there are ways for us to work together for change. And so long as we don't allow that sort of rhetoric and machine, that money to get involved in, and it's just sort of, a messy process. And I talked to Eric a lot about this stuff too, but it's just like, unity is a messy process and real change is a messy process. And we have to embrace that beautiful mess or whatever.
Yeah, the chaos
and
of
we
it.
have to, and so when I said I welcome the battle, it wasn't for the sake of a battle. I'm saying I welcome helping folks understand that people that get things done and people that actually organize effectively in their communities are rarely the ones, the keyboard warriors lecturing people about Marx and that kind of thing. And so that's all I was trying to get out there. And that's kind of where I go with this, is just that like, yes, it's evil and broken, but it's like, we need to put, and I think actually, what's her name? Michaela Loach. She's an activist in England. And she was on Cocktails and Capitalism. That's where I heard her. And she was talking about how, in campaigns that they've done with Stop Cambo, which is an oil field that they are working on preventing, and some other ones. Anyway, they put pressure simultaneously on several fronts. They put legal pressure. They put, political or electoral pressure. And you see it every freaking strike, right? Like we've had a great slew of strikes this summer. It's like, guess who's out every day, or whatever, every week? These politicians, they pour out and they act like, just like Biden, they act like talking is their contribution. But it does show that when pressured, they will at least pretend to do the right thing. And so we just have to put that pressure from every side simultaneously all the time and never relent and never
can't let up.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's where I go with it, is just that sort of idea that like we don't want to sacrifice one of the avenues that we can use to, make them squirm.
We got to use them all, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We've talked a lot on kind of like a macro level right now about like the presidential elections and things like that. One of the ways to kind of help what we've been talking about, and this may sound corny too, but I think about it the same way that the old slogan about recycling, which was think globally, act locally, right?
Yep.
Organize at your level, right? Organize the people where you live for whatever cause you want, right? If you have a cause and it's, a worthy cause, who the hell is he to say what a worthy cause is? Well, I will say anyone that wants to do something to help someone else,
right,
or even help themselves if they need it, right, that's, as long as you're not hurting other people to do it, that's most likely a worthy cause, right?
Like you said, who we're talking to here.
yeah And it's like, the DSA folks, like I know they do a lot of work around here where I live, which is in the Madison, Wisconsin area. They are working with the tenant union here. They're working with the labor people here. There's people from AFSCME that attend meetings with DSA and things like that. And they have an eco-socialist group. Working group that's big on getting the People's Green New Deal going, and they're out right now organizing, trying to stop the Line 5 pipeline, which is in northern Wisconsin and Michigan, among other places. But like, finding those groups you can work with at the local level, because some of them are going to be underneath an umbrella of a larger organization, right? Not all of them, but some of them will. And like you get to know those folks, even if you don't have to join. Right. If you're like, I don't want to join a Democratic Socialist Association, people are going to think I'm a communist. Well, first of all, aside from the fact that there's nothing inherently wrong with communism, don't even worry about it. Right. Like if you see that someone's doing something important, go help if you can. Right. Yeah. Whatever it is. Right. And it's like, it's just it's easy to talk about the macro stuff and get despair, like you said, right?
And we're supposed to do that. And like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Working People podcast, Maximilian Alvarez host, but it's like, he does a great job. It's like, we're not supposed to believe that we matter, that our voices matter, that like you're saying, that we should get better for ourselves and each other. Like, and that's what you encounter with these like right-wing nut jobs, is just like, oh my God, has the Puritan, bullshit been beaten into them, that they just like, think that they don't deserve anything and nobody deserves anything. And it's all just like, dark and like, you have to make it personal, find the real, local connections and go from there. Because ironically with the DSA, I love that example, because you also have a lot of people saying, oh, well, I don't want to be associated with the Democrats either, which, because they have, a certain amount of, institutional relationship to them. But it's like, great. Then again, don't align yourself with that, but do the work of organizing, in whatever way you can. And even if it's selfish, even if you're just worried about your own workplace and getting money, getting, whatever you need. It's like, that's not wrong.
Right. And this leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about too, but to your point about people like, no one deserves anything or whatever. It's like, I see, first of all, that's not true. Second of all, that idea is not true, right? Like,
Right.
Everyone as a human being has a right to
Yes.
certain things, right?
Go off, King.
But aside from that, it's like you look at it a lot when you hear people union bashing, and I'm not talking about the kind of union bashing you get from like Amazon and Starbucks, like executives. I'm talking about the union bashing you get from the guy down at the local bar who got pissed because, you know, some guy did one less unit of work than him and gets paid the same, right?
Yep.
So, but the way those people, I shouldn't say those people. I have heard some people say like, you know, they don't say it explicitly, but they're like, well, you know, why should the union people get paid that much money when I only get paid this, and I'm not, you know, so they don't deserve it because I'm not getting it. And it's like, no, you've got that backwards. You've got that backwards. You should be trying to get that, right? You should be trying to get into that situation because you also have a right to it, right?
Right.
You have a human right to have, you know, people, you know, in a reality, money is now a human right because if you don't have enough money, you can't fucking live, right?
Yep.
You can't eat. You can't afford to eat. Food and water are a human right. And if you don't have money, you can't have those things, right? Or it's very difficult. And you're vilified if you do it, right?
Right.
You know, if you try and do it without, you know.
And you're vilified for doing it for people that don't have it, like Food Not Bombs.
So that, like I said, that brings us into the next thing. And that is like labor organizing and inter-union solidarity. We've talked a little bit about having unity and things like that.
Oh, well, you better lead this one. You're the champ.
But, you know, specifically, you know, and we have talked about this a little bit, but what I'm interested in specifically the mission of this podcast is, you know, it might not be explicitly written this way, but I want to find a way to get common ground with people, to move forward for a shared goal, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the idea. And like, only way you do that is to talk to as many people as possible across as many facets, whether it's the labor movement, the climate movement, all of them, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, specifically for me, so if I've talked about this a little bit on a previous episode, but so for 4.5 years, I was a member of the Service Employees International Union, or SEIU, which I'm sure a lot of people know who they are. They're one of the biggest unions in the world, if not the biggest still. They had over 2 million members when I was a member. I was a worksite leader, bargaining team member, grievance handler, and arbitration committee member. That's a whole lot of words. But basically, I was like I was the leader for the union as an employee of the place I worked at, not an employee of the union. So like if someone was written up for attendance or something and they're like, hey, I didn't have that many attendance points. They miscalculated and wrote me up without it. Like I would start by saying, hey, you know, going to HR and being like, hey, this person says that you didn't calculate this correct. You should rescind this corrective action. And of course, they'd almost never agree, even if it was plainly obvious. And then you'd have to file a grievance, which is just a piece of paper you file saying you violated this person's contractual rights, or worse, you know, workers' rights or harassment or something. Although that didn't happen very often, fortunately. But you know, I filed a ton of grievances when I worked there because that's one of the only ways to make change. Like you have other avenues, right? You do bargaining sessions where you try and negotiate your contract, right? And all these other things. But, you know, it was an interesting thing. And like being you know, sitting in meetings with HR people and just like, you know, I was very like hardlined and surly and like, because I knew they were just taking advantage of people. I could just see it. And it was like, I had, you know, there was a leadership vacuum there.
Yeah.
And I filled it because I could. And because I wanted to, and it needed to be filled. But like, you know, as part of that, I also went with a group of people to meet with some state senators and assembly people at the state capitol in Madison. And that was when the early stages of the organizing for the Fight for 15, which I know is still going on, but it should be the Fight for 25 now.
Hell yeah.
But at any rate, you know, if you can get 15, right? You know, I even ran in an election to be the president of the local, but lost, unfortunately. But it was a good experience. Um, so I built a lot of relationships while I was doing
Mhm.
that. Um, I when I got there, it was like two worksite leaders, and by the time
Mhm.
I was done working there, I had recruited an additional seven
Wow.
over 4 years, and those are just other employees
Mhm.
in other areas of the organization. Now, I was in maintenance, but I recruited people from the kitchen staff and from
Mhm.
the nursing staff. Um,
Rank and file.
yeah, like that's how it works, right? And
Yeah.
like it was a good thing, and like they really didn't like me at all. The management,
Mhm.
they really did not like me.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I bring all that up because I know you said, for one thing, we're talking about unity and solidarity and how to move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
But I know you said you had mentioned to me you had something you wanted to talk about
Oh,
yourself for an organizing story.
sure.
I
So
because I could go
my
on for hours, so I'm gonna turn it over to you.
well,
You're the
I wish
guest.
you would, but um yeah, so I guess my intro to labor organizing is from the smallest, or what was the smallest at the time, independent union of the Starbucks Workers United. And actually now they're, working with SEIU, so that's cool. But yeah, so that's how I got in, was just that, another thing I guess I have to expose, which is that I was like a crazy Starbucks fan growing up, my dad and all that. And so once I started hearing about the workers and the conditions, I just dove right in. And honestly, on the note that we keep bringing together in terms of unity and hope and whatnot, I really was just impressed with the energy of the organizers, from straight out the gates a couple years ago. Now there's like 300 stores and thousands of workers and stuff, but like they were always playing a savvy media game. And again, I like your nice acknowledging about me with Instagram and stuff, but like I could tell that they cared and that they weren't going to let the company just write their story. They weren't going to let mainstream media do what they always do, even for regular union negotiations where they constantly put pressure mid decision, in terms of the bargaining, in terms of every stage, they, manipulate and just, are always the workers basically. But my point is that all of this builds up to my obsession with Starbucks Workers United, and then by osmosis, I guess my wife's, and she, was talking to her trainer recently out here in Inland Empire, and I will say actually, before we get too far, that DSA are pretty active out here too, and they've been helping with Starbucks things that I've been organizing, Starbucks workers and other labor and housing and all kinds of different struggles. So yeah, shout out to them, Inland Empire. But yeah, so my wife, her trainer was a Starbucks manager locally, and her wife was as well. And they had two children, and I think it was actually her fiance. Let me clarify. But anyway, but they were together for a number of years, and the point is that there was a union drive at their store out here in SoCal, and I guess this gym trainer's fiance partner was very successful in crushing it, and to the degree that she was flown out to New York to spend like a year out there basically crushing union actions out there, and they paid for everything and whatnot. But the interesting thing, particularly for me, was that this person, this partner, she left her, partner, she left her children for a year, like right after, I think they had just gotten married, or they're right about to. It was just like a crucial time for their family. And the gym trainer, she was working 80 hours a week, picking up, shifts because it was dangerous, because it was, the conditions were so tough for workers that they were calling out or they were quitting. And anyway, that was just an insane story to me. And now it's like, she's been promoted to a regional sort of director role, this person, and in Southern California. And yeah, yeah, it was just a terrible but illuminating example of what I know you're very versed in from your last episode and whatnot, in terms of just how ruthless Starbucks is, in terms of their union busting, how cruel they are. But yeah, I felt that was an interesting tail.
Yeah, that is, as and it's, when we're talking about union busting, we're talking about breaking the law.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like you can't do those things, especially
Hmm.
if you're Starbucks, right?
Yep.
Or
Yep.
Amazon, or
Yeah.
like, it is against the law for you
Yeah.
to try and prevent your employees from
Yeah.
unionizing
Yeah. But they do it with impunity because,
all
like
the
we pointed out
time.
before about SCOTUS, the
Yeah.
judicial and the apparatus of
Yep.
government and legality is so morally bankrupt.
Right. Well, and for the Starbucks thing in particular, like they've had, hundreds of
Mm.
labor
Yep.
violations
ULP. Yep.
filed against them, right? Unfair
Yep.
labor
Unfair
practices.
labor. Yep.
And they just pay the fine and keep moving along because our laws
Yep.
just aren't good enough to
Yep.
stop it, right?
Yep. And that takes months to get those rulings,
Right.
where they
Yeah.
actually even
Yep.
do those fines. Yep.
Yeah. I will
Yeah,
say
they
this though.
fired 200 pro-union baristas, I just read, so
Yep.
far without
Yep.
any kind of repercussion.
Yeah. It's just totally insane. And there is a bright note to this discussion, and that is just within the last couple of days. I think it was Friday. The National Labor Relations Board, they're who governs unions in the United
Yep.
States,
Yeah.
and tells sets, they're the ones that would handle an unfair labor practice claim and things like that. And if you want to unionize and you get your card signed, the cards have to go to the NLRB so that they can certify it, so you can have your election, et cetera, right? They're the
Yep.
people in charge. And
Mhm.
they just ruled this week. I shouldn't say ruled. They reinstated an old law that said, or not an old law, but an old part of a policy
Yeah.
or something that the labor
Right.
board had, that says if any company now is found to be, union busting after they find out that the people have their cards signed and are trying to
Yep.
have their election, they just
Right.
skip the election altogether and force them, say, okay, they're organized, now you have to
Bam.
bargain with them, right? That's amazing, right? That's
Yep.
fucking great.
Yes.
Of course, until SCOTUS overturns it, when it inevitably gets
Yep.
there,
Yep.
because
No,
someone's
but it's
all.
a real victory. I'm with you. I
It
agree.
is for sure. But I think just, in general, we've seen a huge amount of organizing in the last
Yeah.
year or two, for
Yeah,
sure, right?
And that kind of brutality has brought more people on board, like you were talking about in your most recent episode, or the workers were rather. But like, even with the story I just told, like this manager, was helping workers at that store, the good manager, so to speak, the trainer, was literally helping them organize. And we were just on a DSA labor call, and I had a manager there who's training a whole new team of people, and he's going to help them unionize. He's going to sort of plant those seeds, and he was disheartened because a bunch of people that he had been organizing with quit. But it was like, it's great when these brutal examples can illuminate, again, kind of like back to our, discussion about politics, but can illuminate the brokenness of the system and galvanize people to take action.
Yeah, excellent, for sure. Yeah, galvanize is a great word there. So that does it, I think, for our planned topics.
Yeah.
Is
great.
there anything else you'd like to discuss?
Oh my God. I mean, I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to connect this way. Yeah, I'm sure there's other topics I can come up with, but I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
No worries. There's always time for other conversations too.
That's right.
So yeah. So if listeners want to find you on social media, Anthony, where can they find you?
Sure. So it's just Anthony DePice on Instagram. It's at Anthony DePice. On Facebook, it's Joseph DePice, and Twitter is so that my old handle is still, I think, the active one on Twitter, and that's Loop. So LUPELENAPE 94_. But hit me up. I'd love to connect and just continue to build all the solidarity that we can. Thank you so much, Greg.
Sure. Yeah. Excellent. And I'll have all those handles,
all
those usernames in the show notes for
social
anybody.
Media junkie.
Yeah. No, that's all right. So yeah, Anthony, thank you very much for joining me. This has been great. I enjoyed our time. I think, we're on the right track
Definitely.
with getting some unity going and getting people moving, at least as far as I can tell from the labor movement anyway.
That's right.
The amount of
Yes.
people the amount of different industry union folks that have come together this summer has been pretty to be honest, very surprising, but much needed. So
yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, like I said, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
I'm sure. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Anthony. That does it for the show. Don't forget to rate and review on whichever platform you use to listen. Special thanks to Nick Josephs for the use of the theme song. You can find Nick on Spotify and on the web at nickjosephs.com. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you'd like to support the show, you can subscribe on patreon.com/voicesfromtheleft or donate on buymeacoffee.com/voicesfromtheleft. All the links will be in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and solidarity.